You hit record now, you will get a little pop-up on your screen that indicates that you consent to being recorded by staying in the meeting. So this is going to be, as I said, mostly webinar format where I'm sharing slides, provoking conversation, but it's a small group today. So if you have questions, you don't need to hold it till the end. You can feel free to ask right in the moment. I know sometimes that when I have a question in my brain, holding on to it for 45 minutes can be physically painful or I'll forget it. So let's acknowledge that that happens. We're all human and you just ask a question right when you have it. I will be making use of the chat feature here on Zoom to send some links to you throughout today, but I know obviously that chat will not be live once the Zoom session ends, so I will also email all of you right after this session so you have a copy of those links. So first thing I want to share is the draft of the strategic plan with you. And like I said last night in the council meeting, this is the most recent draft. So we still are going to make some revisions and edits. I'm going to be working with my designer over the next couple weeks to get those completed. And then once we have all of the revisions complete, you'll get a digital toolkit. It's a link that'll have the final version of the plan. It will also have some resources we talk about today, all of the links we talk about today, some templates, etc. So you're going to have sort of a living digital space where all of these resources will be available. But I want to walk you through the elements of the plan a little bit more intimately today. Oh, and again, here's my email. If you have any questions, please don't be shy about reaching out to me directly. I don't bill extra for folks who want to ask me a question. I absolutely love hearing from past clients when they have questions or if they'd like to talk through a challenge they're facing. I welcome it. So please don't be shy if you run into a challenge as you're using the plan. I love, love, love following up with clients and hearing how things are going after we're done with our formal work together. So really our focus today is going to be on what do we do now that we have a strategic plan? How do we plan to revisit the plan? What's that sort of frequency we should engage with the tool so that we really get our best value out of it? How do we address emerging issues that come forward? And how do we report out in a meaningful way to both the city council and to the public our progress in implementing the strategic plan? So first, we want to introduce you to your strategic plan. I know that this came before council last night, but you may not have had a chance yet to really dive at a super great depth into the document. So the document's really divided into three parts. First, we have the intro, which starts on page 5, which outlines your values, mission, and vision. It gives you a high-level executive summary of the 11 goals that make up the plan, and it defines some of the strategic plan jargon terms you're going to see throughout the document, such as goals, objectives, initiatives, data measures. We are also loving the fact that you have a wonderful Chamber Visitors Bureau in Ludington. Of all the communities we've worked in, you guys had some of the most phenomenal photos we were able to make use of. So kudos to you. You guys get the award this year for the most photogenic community. Sometimes we have clients and they're like, can you send us some pictures? And they send us like a really blurry picture of their city hall. We're like, oh, we don't really want to use that. But we had a bounty of beautiful pictures to use. The bulk of the plan is this written sort of narrative structure, which we call the plan narrative, which outlines each of those goals. It has a section called Why This Matters, which we tried to, as much as possible, break down the crux of the issue in plain English and really have something that you can use to speak to residents or constituents of any nature, be they business, employees, visitors, to understand why this is something you're focusing on. So first it says, this is our big picture goal in that orange box. Then the blue box says, why does this matter? And then the objectives, those are sort of the next level under a goal. So the objectives spell out, this is what you plan to do. And then under each objective, you have a task, which we call initiatives. Each initiative has at least one data measure. The data measures are suggestions, and we'll talk a little bit more about how there needs to be some flexibility for which measures you choose to use within your organization. We don't want to create a job in and of itself of just tracking data. Tracking data and measures of success needs to be relatively organic and intuitive within your organization. So you're able to see on each of these pages throughout the plan what your goal is, why you're focused on it, and what are those baby incremental steps you're taking to realize that goal. Then we discussed this a little bit last night at the meeting. Oftentimes we split the strategic framework into a separate document to keep length of document down, but based on council feedback, we're not going to have two versions of the plan. You're just going to have one version that includes the strategic framework. So disregard that it says appendix. This won't be really considered an appendix or a separate document. It'll just be part of the heart of the document. Now, I am like a to-do list spreadsheet queen. So I thrive off of being able to have something I can scribble on, check off. And I find that I've met across my client organizations, it seems like there are a lot of folks in local government that really resonate with that. Those sort of type A doers that just, they make a to-do list and the first thing they write on it is like, make a to-do list so that they can scratch it off that list, right? There's so many people like us in this sector. So I have had people share basically saying like, oh, is there any way we could get a checklist with this? This is why this exists. If you're not someone that resonates with lists, you don't have to use this section. But the people that really like having a tactical planner, this section's for you. So every single one of those objectives, goals, and initiatives, as well as the data measures that are listed in the written pages we just looked at, they're in tabular form here. We also added a couple other areas. We added a suggested targeted completion date, priority ranking, which ties directly to that completion date. So things that are ranked as urgent, we suggest you complete within the next calendar year. And then as it gets less urgent, it goes further out. And then what resources do you need? We refrain from putting actual budget numbers in these documents because the numbers are just so fluid. But we let you know, is this something that you need research, where you need a policy to be changed by city council or a committee, or do you need funding? So not every element of the plan requires funding. And we did that intentionally because we understand how resource scarce so many communities we work with are. So we want to set you up by offering a variety of solutions to the challenges you're facing. Some inevitably require funding, but not all of them. Some of them are where you can research or develop a best practice based on what you find in other places, or where you can change a policy, which may incur a funding change, but it's not the same thing as like a direct budget line item to pay for XYZ. So this is the bulk of what the plan looks like. Any questions at this high level summary of the plan at this point?
Do some of your clients then build out that so it's assigned to specific individuals or a specific department with check-in dates or results, that type of thing?
Yes, it depends on kind of what the leadership preferences are. I know I just did a follow-up visit with a client last week. So she worked with me early in my business and she actually did a 10-year strategic plan, which to be honest, I would not do again because it's just way too long of a time frame.
No,
So they're 3 years into it now. So we did a really robust 3-year check-in and we actually broke out, we kind of split into lumps, like of what the next 6 years look like this 2 year, this 2 year, this 2 year phasing. And we built out really robust sheets that detail what they've completed under each goal section. So, and actually at the departmental level. So some people use it that way. We also will send this framework in an Excel format because we know things change. It was interesting to me how even though the plan's only 3 years old in that community, there was a lot of areas that they say, actually, we had this situation change and now this is no longer relevant. We no longer need to pursue this. So we understand that there's a level of obsolescence to these documents and we want to give you something that's a little bit more flexible for you to edit in years to come. Any other questions? Okay. And remember, please don't be shy if you have one. Feel free to just jump in and interrupt. You won't hurt my feelings. So now that you have your strategic plan, what can you do with it to set yourself up for success? First, we never want to see plans get dusty. Too often we hear from clients like, oh yeah, we brought a consultant in to do that and now it's sitting on a shelf, right? And I really felt that it was a very positive experience working with all of you. I felt like we had a really good, even though it was a long day, we had a really heavy and productive day of thinking and coming together and working with each other at our one-day retreat back in June. We want to keep that momentum going, especially knowing as you're going to have some future leadership transitions, we want to keep this excitement and momentum moving forward. So I always like to coach my clients to say, really my goal in working together was not just to help bring structure to chaos and take everything that's sort of tangled and here's what we want to address, here's what we want to work on and create that clear roadmap. It's also to teach you the muscle memory of how to think strategically. And I've been slowly planting seeds across our time together to coach you in these strengths of not thinking of planning as something that we do every few years, but really a muscle that we use regularly. Because planning is something that we don't just engage in once every 5 years. It's a process that we use and we revisit frequently in how we manage issues in our community. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So, all of my clients say to me, we're really busy, but it is not lost on me the nature and seasonality of quite how busy things are in a heavily vacation seasonal community like Ludington. So, we're going to talk a little bit about an analogy called rocks, pebbles, and sand. So, this analogy, you may have encountered it before. It's used in many places, ranging from executive training, personal life coaching, and it's a way of looking at time management, productivity, and prioritization. And I will share with you in the chat right now, and then you can feel free to watch this later on your own. If you want a much more visually and concise version of this, there's a 4-minute YouTube video that does this better than I do. So we'll let you take advantage of that. But this idea really breaks down the fact that we all have the same amount of time each day, right? So if this mason jar represents the 8 to 9 hours that we spend professionally each day, we all theoretically should have the same 5 jars, right? That make up our work week, 7 if you work 7 days a week, which I hope none of you are on government time. So our time and the tasks that we have to deal with, we're trying to fit as much as possible into this glass jar, into our 8 hours. Rocks are those big picture goals you have. And arguably, we would hope that some of those rocks will be over the next 5 years, some of these 11 strategic goals that we've identified for your organization. So the rocks are these big, meaty things that we need to fit into the jars. We figured out through this process what are the baby steps to get there, but it still can kind of feel like this big onerous task that we're not really sure how to fit in around the rest of our day. The question is always, well, where are we magically going to come up with all this time to do this? And that's where the rest of the jar comes into play. We have pebbles, which are your day-to-day tasks that you have to do every single day, whether that's answering emails, answering phone calls, filing reports, working on packet items. They're just sort of those day-to-day or cyclical or seasonal tasks that are a part of your role that you can't offload. And then lastly, we have everyone's favorite in local government is the sand. And I love the analogy of sand, especially with you guys being a beach town. We all know how difficult it is to avoid sand, right? Like it's all over your car mats. It somehow seeps its way all the way into your house. If you bring in one sandy towel, it's very difficult to escape. Just as this version of sand, emergencies, emphasis on the air quotes, are in local government. Not a day goes by when communities don't share with me, I actually have to get my job done after hours, or I come in early to get work done. I hear again and again from local government clients this idea that there's so many distractions that finding time to do really focused work is really challenging. And there's a couple of reasons for that. The first is the level of transparency of local government. Obviously, the nature of democracy insists that there's open doors for the public. The second point is many of us respond directly or indirectly, but have some sort of relationship with elected officials where they not necessarily direct, I don't want to challenge the city manager model, but they're providing feedback, right? They're saying, hey, I heard this. Is this true? Can you provide an update on this? And when you have folks that are truly being reelected based on their responsiveness to constituents, it can seem very immediate. In our mind, working day to day, we might think, okay, Janice's garbage is not a life or death emergency, but it might feel that way for Janice, which means it ended up on your plate to address it. So sand is that stuff that just manages to creep in. And if we think about filling this jar every day, if we try to fill it first by managing all those emergencies, then stacking in our day-to-day tasks, you can see that strategic goals there's no room for them. They're spilling over the top of the jar. And it's that same mindset I hear when clients say to me, where are we supposed to find the time to do this? It's because we're starting with the wrong thing. We're starting with those little emergencies, those issues that pop up and will always pop up. Then we're filling in the rest of the time, probably 90% of the jar with our day-to-day tasks. If you approach your work this way, there's absolutely no time to work on big strategic goals. So I want to challenge you to rethink, how do we focus on our rocks first, on our strategic goals first? When we make time every week, we suggest 1 hour, and I'll tell you what to do with that hour shortly. If you spend 1 hour a week focused on your big picture goals, then let your day-to-day tasks fill in. And then lastly, let that sand funnel in around it. If you just think about it from a physics standpoint, biggest item goes in the jar first, the pebbles will fill around it, then the sand will fill around it. From a physics standpoint, you can actually fit more into the jar than you would if you were stuck on using the emergencies to sand and sand to fill up the jar first. So at this point, I usually have a couple skeptics in the Zoom room. So let's switch our lens for a second. Let's not talk about strategic planning. Let's talk about one of the number one New Year's resolutions that we hear people make. And this is one that certainly I am not great about. So this is not coming from a place of preachiness by any means. One of the biggest goals people set for themselves every year, whether it's beginning of the school year, beginning of the calendar year, is to exercise more. Now, we all know all the excuses why we don't make exercise a priority. So here's an article. These are cited top ways to make time for a workout. And they're really logical, right? Like make yourself or like exercise in this case, the first priority of your day, put it on your calendar, have the necessary tools with you. I'm like the queen of I'll make an excuse to not go. So I keep my shoes in my car permanently because I never want to be like, oh, darn, I'm in sandals. Guess I can't work out today. Have those tools on hand so you can't make an excuse, and then have an accountability partner. So if we apply, and these make sense, right? Like we're not contesting it. We're like, yeah, I guess if I approached it that way, I probably could find an hour or 30 minutes for a workout. If we apply that same logic to strategic goal setting, those same ways apply here. So we're saying 1 hour, make strategic goals and scheduling that 1 hour the first priority of your week. What is that 1 hour you can carve out for strategic goal setting? Have it on your calendar and don't move things around it. Make sure it remains a priority. Keep your goals and issue lists, which we'll talk about. Those are your real tools to success on hand, and have accountability through your colleagues. And we'll dive into each of those steps. But really, whether your goal is to work out more or to actually see your strategic plan implemented, you can use a lot of these same tactics. So I keep bringing up revisiting the plan. So the plan is pretty overwhelming, right? I think there's something like 70 initiatives within it, and I think it came in around 32 pages. It's not a small document, and I understand how overwhelming that can be. And I hope that through today, I can reassure you that we don't expect you to implement overnight. We don't expect you to understand how to implement overnight. This is a big goal, and just like eating an elephant would be a big goal, we're going to attack it one bite at a time. So I want you to just remember, we're not going to implement the thing in one foul go. It's going to be a process. It's going to be learning new muscles and techniques, and you have 5 years to do it. That's a long time, okay? So just take a second to calm down and say, it's going to be okay. There's no expectation we'll do this overnight. So we recommend that you revisit your strategic plan on a weekly basis. So what this means is every other week it's a 1 hour meeting, and then that alternating week it's 1 hour of homework for yourself. And I'm going to include some guides in that link of digital resources, including a copy of this sheet that talks about what are the meetings you'll have, how frequently you'll have them, and what do you accomplish in each of them. So let's talk a little bit about that. This process we just wrapped, your full strategic plan rewrite. This is the only exercise where we recommend you bring in an outside facilitator. And the reason we do that is so that your city management can be involved in the process rather than having to serve as a facilitator. All of the other more frequent meetings that you have, you're fully able to facilitate internally. And I'm sure that that's something that your new city manager would be more than happy to take on. And I'm more than happy to run through this slide deck as well with them once they're onboarded. The goals for a 3 to 5 year strategic plan review are your mission, vision, values check-in, completing a full SWOT analysis, which we did, and then defining your strategic goals and assigning who's going to take the lead on what. So this process could take usually about 6 months. A lot of that's spent in research and plan development, but count on kind of 1 to 3 workshops across that time frame. We jammed them all into one day. There's some pros and cons of doing that. From a travel standpoint, it made sense for Ludington. But I think sort of the downside of doing a 1 day all in one fell swoop activity is it's a lot of brain work. And I could tell that by the end of that 1 day, people are kind of dragging mentally because it's a lot to ask of folks to say, come sit in a room for 6 hours and really think, right? Many of us lack the attention span to do that. So However you approach it in the future, whether it's across one day again or across several days, just kind of have this timeline in mind every 3 to 5 years. For an organization of your size, especially with this being your first formal plan, I would say lean on the longer end of that 5 year timeline. I have some clients that they're super nimble. They seem to really thrive on having goal lists and they implement things more quickly. But here's the thing, if you find in year 3, hey, wow, we're really cooking along here, we're almost done, you can react and budget at that time for an update, but you don't get an award or a medal for implementing your strategic plan faster. So give yourself the time to do it right. Now, once a year, we encourage you to do a 3 year goal setting. And this is a short meeting. This is just a 1 hour meeting. You can facilitate internally. And this is where you're thinking, much like we did with that vision exercise, where we crafted on the post-its what our vision was for Ludington. You're identifying those big picture, fuzzier goals of what you want your future to look like. And again, it's fuzzy. So it's just revisiting that vision and saying, where do we want to be in 3 years? A little bit of a shorter timeline. This can often be accompanied with a 1 year goal setting. So do a 2 hour meeting, 1 hour focused on your 3 year goals, 1 hour focused on your 1 year goals. Now, as we get a little bit more specific about our goals, especially when we're into 1 year territory, that's where we want to have what are called SMART goals. So we're no longer thinking fuzzy head in the clouds. We're thinking really attainable, which means that those goals need to be specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and have a timestamp on them of when you want to accomplish it by. Now, quarterly goal setting, this is kind of where the magic happens. And this is also the one that's hardest for me to convince communities to engage in. Our brain does really well with 90-day or shorter increments. There's actually a lot of brain science that points out that our brain doesn't really understand the difference between 90 days or 365 days. There's something magic about that 3 month window that we can really resonate with that time, and we understand what we can accomplish within that time. A year is just too big for our brain. So 30-day increments, 330s, 30, 60, 90, we do really well with that. So why not work with what the brain science is saying about how we respond to 90-day increments to maximize it? Boil your big picture, that 1 or 3 year goal you've set, into what can you do in 90 days. So you have some ownership in this. You're able to look at your schedule, your availability. Maybe you have a little bit more pep in your step in the winter when it's downtime, rather than when you run ragged in the summer quarters. But you look at that one picture goal and at a departmental level say, what can I work on in my department in the next quarter to get closer to this goal? And give yourself some tasks and some accountability there. And this is an exercise we foresee happening specifically with management and department supervisors. Now, here's where the every other week meetings come in. So like we said, we would like to see you ideally spend one hour in a meeting 2 times a month. So oftentimes that looks like every other week. A lot of communities choose to schedule it the weeks opposite of council because they know there's a lot of prep work and extra hours that go into city council meeting weeks. And part of that decision too has to do with what I'll explain in just a second, which is what you do with your hour on the alternate weeks. So if you have this weekly or biweekly meeting, this is a 1 hour meeting typically held with city management and department heads, which is not, it is not, I want to just make very clear, this is not meant to be tacked on to your regular standing department head meetings. This is a separate meeting that is just focused on strategic plan implementation, which I know a lot of people say, where are we going to find that hour? Go back through those last few slides about where to find that hour. You can find it if you put the rocks in your time jar first. So the purpose of this meeting is to check in on emerging issues. This is where the sand comes back. Use the IDS strategy, which we'll talk about in just a second here, and to have accountability check-ins with your colleagues. So we foresee in year 1, 2025, you will be using the first year to really build that muscle memory at your department head level of how these meetings work. Once you get used to having these check-ins twice a month, once every other week, it will become muscle memory and you'll be able to bring it down to your departments. And then supervisors will be able to train sort of their staff on how to have these kind of meetings in 2026 and beyond. Now, when I say sand and emerging issues, we really feel strongly that dropping what you're doing to address issues coming in from constituents is not a very productive way to work. it seems that in many communities it is the expectation. And I hear a lot of times like, oh, that's good customer service. Good customer service is responding to community members' needs, but it's also putting yourself as employees and subject matter experts in a position where you can do your best work as effectively and efficiently as possible. If you are constantly being distracted and pulled in and out of your work and you're likely to make a mistake, that's not good customer service. That's not good stewardship of tax dollars. You need to find that healthy boundary between responding to the needs of folks but also doing your job well. And there is so much data out there on how our focus, even if we just so much as see an alert in the bottom of our screen that an email's come in, how it will take us 5 to 10 minutes to actually regain the focus that we just left by seeing that email notification come in. So we have to set ourselves up with healthier work habits on how and when we manage issues. The other thing too is so many times we receive a quick call or a complaint about something and we jump to resolve it because we want to get it off our plate, but we're trying to solve it as quickly as possible, which means two things. It means one, we are trying to solve it solo. We are not asking around for help or for collaboration or leaning on our teammates who maybe have ideas on how to address that issue. And two, we're trying to solve it as fast as possible. We're not actually taking these perhaps very valid issues that constituents are raising and setting aside intentional time to discuss them. So by having these meetings every other week, you're actually able to kind of vet out and say, all right, is this issue that's coming in life safety or could it wait a week? And then what you can do is you can build an ongoing list of issues and build this expectation of, look, we come together as a leadership team every 2 weeks. We work on these issues. The whole purpose of this meeting is to address issues that are coming in. And you can set expectations. So if somebody calls you and says, I need this, instead of saying, I'll get back to you when I get back to you, which no one likes to hear, you're able to say, great, I'm adding it to the agenda for this meeting. This is when you can expect to hear back from me. And some of it's coaching new expectations. The reality is that government work and the work that's on your plates has gotten more complex because you're trying to reach people on different platforms. Laws and rules and statutes are changing constantly. The reality of being able to deliver same day deliverables and returns on service, it's kind of an outdated expectation. And it will be a little bit of adjustment for folks to realize maybe the turnaround's not as fast as I'd liked, but you can coach folks to understand a longer time to respond if they're getting a quality response back. So this is really not about high speed, it's about high quality. How can you really take to heart the issues and those sand emerging emergencies that really come in and interfere with your day each day and segregate time for them to say, I've got 1 hour a week on your non-meeting weeks where I'm really digging into my list of issues that have come in and looking at like, okay, how could we solve this? How do I prevent this call from happening again? If I solve it for this one person, what am I doing to fix the root cause so that it doesn't happen again? So we'll come back to that whole root cause discussion in just a second here. But all of these practices we're recommending, I wish that I could claim that I brilliantly invented all of them, but alas, I did not. I read them in a book. So I purchased copies of both of these books for the city. I'm not sure if they're still in Mitch's office. If they're not, let me know. I will send you 2 more.
No, I
Mitch,
haven't seen those.
he took those books and ran, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
I don't know.
No, that's okay. I will send you guys a couple more. So the black book that's kind of in the back of the picture, Traction, this is the one that's really key for managers to read. And I read this book and I swear it just like changed my entire vision. It's a private sector guided system on how to run a business, but it is really what I think is the missing puzzle piece in having more effective governments that really run smoothly. What the heck is EOS? The orange book in the front. This one is more geared towards team members, and it really does a lot of work to break down jargon and definitions that EOS uses. But their whole idea is that it's called EOS, which stands for Entrepreneurial Operating System. So operating system like what your cell phone runs on. And there's 6 components of that, and some of them we've already addressed. So they walk you through mission and vision. We already did that in our mission vision exercise. We talk about data, which is what are the data measures for each of your goals? We've built those into your strategic plan. Process, traction, issues, and people. And I'll talk really quickly through each of these 6 pieces. But those 6 pieces, they're common things that exist across all businesses and organizations, including governments. So let's start with vision. It's not enough to just have a great vision statement. Your entire organization needs to communicate it frequently, which means that all of your employees know what the vision is. I apologize. Sorry for that typo. That should say for the next 5 years for the city, not the county. Do all employees within the organization understand how their work is meaningful and how it ties back to vision? That's the other piece. So we had crafted a vision and mission statement for the city. These are in the final plan document. And you can see that the vision that was crafted, again, the difference between vision and mission, vision's aspirational, like this is maybe a little bit of a pipe dream, but here's where we'd love to be. Mission is this is the promise we're giving to our residents. It's very attainable. It's not something that you suspect you won't be able to do. So I'll give you a second to take in that vision and mission. And again, this whole slide deck will be available to you as well. Data. So year one of strategic plan implementation is heavily focused on data tracking, sort of identifying what data points do you want to track? Do you have the tools to make data tracking easy? And how to build that muscle memory of understanding this is what I track. I have the tools and technology to track it without making data tracking another 40-hour job in your already packed week. So one organization that I feel does a really excellent job with their strategic plan and their strategic goals is the city of Durham, North Carolina. So they are obviously a little bit larger of a community. And I'm going to drop a link in the chat for you guys. I'm not sure if it's up and live. Actually, let's take a look and see. So they were updating their strategic dashboard. So you can see it says check back September 13th. We'll see if it's actually up and running now. I don't think it is. Okay, well, bookmark this page. We'll check on it in a few weeks and see if it is up and running. But they have an interactive dashboard where residents can go on, see each of their strategic goals. So you can see here they have 5 strategic goals, the objectives and initiatives, and they can actually click on each component. And for each component, they have a section very similar to yours that says, why does this matter? Why is this important to me as a resident? And it has data charts. So it'll say, here's the data measure we're tracking to see how we're doing. And it's updated quarterly or annually, depending on the data measure. So it offers this incredible level of transparency to residents where they can really understand, okay, these are the 5 top things my local government's working on, why they're doing it, and I as a resident can understand and track their success in it. Now, I know having a full standing dashboard is kind of a tall order for communities. So we suggest maybe starting with baby steps like an annual report where, your management's putting together a report that says, here's where we are on this goal. Here's maybe some of the big accomplishments we've had. And here's the data measures and what our baseline is. Start small. You don't need to have a dashboard. You're not the city of Durham, but I think that's sort of like the Cadillac version of taking your plan and translating it in a really effective way for residents. So as you'll recall, I noted that the framework section has the data measures for each objective and initiative spelled right out in it. This is sort of that helpful cheat sheet to say, which measures am I working on in my department? What data should I be tracking? We also suggest that the data measures we put in are our suggestions. They are not ironclad. This is something that management should establish with each department and say, what's a data measure that works for you to track that's not going to be onerous or too time consuming for you to track? And then lastly, a big reason why we recommend data. Data is the opposite of emotion. So by following this regular every other week meeting schedule and having a structured agenda, which we also provide to you, of how that meeting should run, you're going to understand where you're on track and where you need more support. Now, so often we're used to environments that have either unhealthy competitive nature where people don't feel safe acknowledging around colleagues, oh, I'm actually not on track or I need a little bit more support. We're also where we feel like we're going to meet shame or disappointment. We really want to encourage you that when you discuss whether or not you're on track with a goal or not, it's not inviting people to like mock your department or make fun of your capacity. It's just saying like, hey, I'm not on track. I need resources or support, and eliminating the emotion from that so that it really can just remind us our shared goal is reaching that vision. If your team member is not on track and needs more support, How do we have the data point that out rather than reducing them to a place of vulnerability or shame? That's never the goal. We want you to all remember you're working towards that same consensus-driven vision together. So process. This is an area that many organizations I've worked with, including Ludington, have indicated that they want to get better at. Process refinement is important for two really key reasons. One, people are turning over in the public sector much more rapidly than they used to. And there's a lot of generational reasons for that, but it's a reality we're living in. So if you have your processes document, so they're done consistently every single time, and so you can train folks in how to do them, it's going to make employee onboarding and transition a lot less of a headache. The other reason is, in addition to the fact that turnover is happening more rapidly, a lot of government organizations are really experiencing what some are calling the silver tsunami, where we see a lot of baby boomers exiting the workforce en masse. So you're having a huge amount of institutional knowledge and experience leaving the workforce, using process mapping to document how things are done consistently and almost creating those manuals of here's how to be cross-trained, or if I don't come into work ever again after I win the lottery, here's how to pick up and do my job. It's going to make sure that as you lose that institutional knowledge, you're hedging your bets so that it's not as much of an incredible disservice to the organization. Issues, we've talked at length about that sand or those shiny objects, right? By having dedicated space for issue discussion versus dropping everything we're doing to address an issue, we can use these meetings as a chance to collaborate with our peers, give focused, intentional time versus finding 5 minutes and trying to solve an issue as quickly as we can. And by ensuring that we get to the root cause of issues. Too often when we are faced with an issue, what we do is we misaddress a symptom as the root cause because we don't take time to think about it. We say, oh, such and such happened, here's why. But we just kind of pick that off the top. And when we address issues, problems, whatever in our life, unless we do that more in-depth discussion of it, we oftentimes are, in fact, misdiagnosing the symptom for the root cause. So we suggest that you use a process called IDS, which I'm going to touch on in another slide. People. So people comes down to two elements: right people and in the right seats. Sometimes you have an employer or team member that's a phenomenal fit for the organization, but they are not thriving in their role. That's a case of having the right person in the wrong seat. Sometimes a person is not a great values fit for the organization, no matter what job they're in. That's a right person, and that's a wrong person. It doesn't matter what seat they're in because they're the wrong person. So it's really important as you move forward in hiring that you're making sure that you're centering those values at the center of the conversation. And you'll recall when we did our core values exercise, we did that exercise where we had all of the words generate a word cloud. So here is a snapshot of one of those. And the values that came out of that were really resonated with the most folks across both workshops were caring, compassionate, service, and integrity. So how do you actually use your interviewing process to ask folks about either experiences or examples where they've demonstrated compassion or where they show caring in their life? You can train skills. You cannot train values. People are wired with shared values or they're not. And so many organizations are fearful because of the nature of the labor market right now that they have to take whatever comes across their desk. It may be a reality that you have slim pickings, but if you find creative ways to present your values up front, it'll be like a siren call, like just drawing people in that match your values. One of my past clients, and I'm happy to share some examples of position descriptions. It's a small community, maybe about 8,000 people here in Wisconsin. They started including their core values in their position descriptions, and they included a sentence that really states, these are the values we really emphasize in our organization. Here's how we live them. And each value has a sentence associated with it. They wrote those together as a team member. They put those front and center on position descriptions because they want people that are considering applying to their organization to know up front, this is what we value. And they typically incorporate one or two of the values into interview questions. Your resume speaks for itself, but interviews are that important chance to understand the person behind the resume. And then lastly, do you have accountability in your organization by having those regular meetings where you're tracking your own goals and that align with the bigger goals for the organization and the strategic plan? And do you have a psychologically safe space where you feel like you can go into management and say, hey, I'm not on track with this goal. Can you help me? So let's talk about that IDS that I keep referencing. So IDS stands for Identify, Discuss, Solve. We know that as soon as we send you this plan, something will change, right? Local government is ever evolving. New issues come forward, elections happen, priorities change, emergencies happen. It's the nature of the beast. There's literally no stability except for the fact that you will still exist. That's the only stable thing that happens in local government. So, how do we enable you with the tools to address emerging issues? If we were to come back in 3 months or 3 years, your SWOT analysis would probably look different. So knowing that we're not coming back for several years until you're at the point where you need that 5-year update, we want to make sure you have the tools to manage those new issues that come forward within your organization. So the first thing we encourage is write them down. Use that 1 hour every other week that you're not in a meeting to be managing issues, which means physically write them down or keep a little cheat sheet on a Word doc on your computer that's bookmarked right on your homepage that you can access readily. Document issues that come forward that are not a quick fix, where you actually need to commit some brain power to it. Where it's an issue, maybe you've had this phone call from 16 residents separately over the last 4 years. That's 16 hours. If each time you spend an hour fixing it, that's 16 hours that all of a sudden that's like a third of your work week, right? So rather than insist that that problem have to be solved again the same way, write it on the list so that you can figure out a way to fix the process, fix that root cause so that the problem doesn't happen again for that resident or anyone else. And we have a uh, what is this called? Brochure handout that we will include with your final resources that talks about what your issues list might look like. And this comes down to identifying symptom versus root cause. If you're not identifying the root cause, it will emerge later. So, how do you open yourselves up to having conversations about where perhaps a person is the root cause? So, oftentimes, if we dig down, maybe somebody in a different role might have contributed to this issue, and they may not have done so intentionally or maliciously, but even unknowingly, they're part of what this root cause is. Having your identify, discuss, solve issues discussion every other week in your strategic plan meeting check-ins, that might mean some open and honest, but sometimes uncomfortable conversations. So just something to be aware of. It can be a little uncomfy when you start discussing issues. Now, we suggest too, and all of this is in the EOS books, oftentimes organizations have a couple people that are a little bit more extroverted or outspoken or less shy with their opinions. This can be a real hesitant factor for folks who are more introverted or quiet, who say like, "Ooh, I do not like this idea of having a roundtable discussion on issues management." Having some ground rules on how you're going to conduct those meetings is important, which means that you're going to get everyone together, everyone will have a chance to share their thoughts on that issue, but only once. If you allow folks to dominate the conversation and share more than once, it turns quickly from productive discussion into politicking. And it can take those folks who are a little bit more introverted or uncomfortable and reduce them right away to wallflower status because the dynamics are not equal. So just be mindful of that. And this is an area where city management can really help set healthy boundaries on how to conduct yourself in one of these meetings. Once you've actually identified and discussed the issue, so figure out that root cause and discuss it, now you can solve. So often the type of folks attracted to work in local government are to their core problem solvers, right? But if we solve first without making sure we're solving the correct issue, it's pretty much destined that that issue is going to come back up again. And we're going to have to do what? Solve it again. So by solving issues differently, actually making the solving the last step, you hopefully will reduce those number of instances so that you are freeing up more of your time for that focus work. So in summary, the 5 parts, I know that I said there were 6 on the EOS sort of traction wheel. The 5 takeaways I want you to have are: we don't want you to have meetings just to have meetings. They need to serve a purpose. They should be productive and solutions oriented. You feel leaving like, I got something out of that. You should have clear steps to establish who's going to be doing what And again, these are all outlined on the agendas for each of these types of meetings. Dig deep with the 5 whys and prepare to have sometimes uncomfortable, vulnerable conversations. But know that even if it gets uncomfortable, you're all working toward that shared vision that you crafted together. So the last thing I want to talk about briefly is about reporting out. And I know some folks have a meeting at the top of the hour. We'll be done in like 3 minutes, honestly. So just bear with me for a couple more minutes. So we have designed a fillable implementation tool for your organization that we will upload on that Google Drive for you to download. You can edit this document in Word or in Acrobat, and it has a space for 5, 3, 1 year, and quarterly goals in this document. And we strongly encourage you to print this out, use it regularly, keep it tacked up on the wall or on your bulletin board, somewhere you can access it. We also recommend too that you document your issues like we shared and keep them together because you want to bring this goal sheet and your issues list to each meeting where you discuss the strategic plan. Lastly, use your strategic plan to your benefit to help educate your elected officials. We have heard from feedback that some city council members, we get it, they're elected officials, they had different professions, many of them did not work in local government, that they may not really understand what your job looks like day to day. It is a big problem, right? If you're trying to advocate for why you need resources or why you have to address an issue a certain way and they don't understand your job or the nuances of it, it can be really challenging and really frustrating. You can use your implementation tool and the content from these meetings every other week to be able to generate meaningful reports for City Council that says, here's what we're working on, here's the issues we're discussing, here's the action items we're working on in relationship to the strategic plan, and here's all the progress updates of where we are on it. By having the strategic plan that's the shared, agreed upon checklist for the whole organization, you can communicate more effectively with folks that don't do your job to better understand what you're doing to serve that greater vision. Lastly, whirlpools happen, right? So the whirlpool analogy is just this idea that you're sailing along and then all of a sudden out of nowhere an emergency arises, throws everything off. Maybe it's a lawsuit, maybe it's a blog post, maybe it's an emergency that could have been avoided, right? They happen in different shapes, colors, and sizes in every community. And oftentimes, whirlpools have a pesky habit of grabbing those who are newer to the organization, elected or staff, and holding them hostage. Those of you that are seasoned veterans, you can probably take a tough day or a tough challenge with the best of them because you've seen them before and you know that they'll pass. But if someone's new to this game, they may be a little wary, they may be a little hesitant, they may be shaken up a bit by a whirlpool. You can do your best to steer the ship, your organization, out of the whirlpool by reminding those elected officials and your colleagues of how this issue relates back to the strategic vision. I guarantee if you parse it out, if you take this new issue that's emerged and go through the identify, discuss, solve process, you'll find a connection back to one of the elements in your SWOT analysis. And how by following this plan, we've all agreed upon through this last year, that this is what's going to get you to that big picture goal and address that issue. So just tie it all back together. I would be very surprised if you had any issues come forward that didn't have some relationship deep down to one of the 11 goals you've set in that plan. So lastly, when you have that doubt, bring it back to shared vision. There were some communication challenges in this organization when we came in with the public, internally, externally, but I was really proud of the fact that you all overcame those challenges and those pain points and treated this process with a great deal of respect. And through that, you've now created this vision and a mission and 70 initiatives within it under your 11 goals that you hope to get to in the next 5 years. And I'm really confident that if you keep focused on what that shared vision is, you'll be able to get there. So that wraps my presentation for today. I am more than happy to chat further and answer any questions you might have.
I need to get to the meeting. So I can't think of any right offhand, Ellison. My only question, my only question would be, our new city manager will be coming in, hopefully tentatively like November 4th. And I think she needs to see this.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a little bit unusual where we have management change midstream, but I was planning, I'm going to be in Sparta, which I think is maybe like an hour away from you guys, maybe a little bit further. I'm going to be in Sparta in November. So I was going to offer anyway to do a Zoom meet and greet, But if your manager is available, I mean, we could find something in the middle. Maybe we can meet up in person and build that in-person relationship and I can go over anything. But yeah, I am more than happy. I don't really put this in writing because I'm sure once I do, I'll probably get sued or something. But I
Okay.
always offer ongoing support. So if clients have new department heads start, I offer a free like, sit down session where we can go through the plan, answer questions they have. So I'm available,
Okay.
and I've never had anyone abuse it yet. So yeah, that's why it's not in writing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Jen, I'm gonna go, but you can stay.
That was a great overview. It's kind of excites you to what this plan can do for the city.
I can't wait. I mean, you have such phenomenal team members.
Oh,
I think the biggest challenge you're going to have is how do you keep it going in the busy season? And how do you, if it slows down during the busy season, which I get it if you have to follow a little bit like, look, strategic planning goes into like a hibernation mode for a couple months, then we come back out of it. How do you not lose momentum when you're sitting here next September coming out of the busy season and say, okay, this time last year we had our heads full of steam and we were coming out of our busy season ready to go, fired up about this. How do you not lose that momentum when you reach the end of the next busy season?
yeah. And I can see, having just come out of it, where that could be really tough here. But again, it's those whirlpools. We don't know what, next year's buzz summer issue will be. We just know it will be something.
Yep.
So, well, thank you, Allison, and we will stay in touch, and we appreciate all the work you did on this and are continuing to do. So,
Thank you.
thank
If you
you.
guys, anybody else have any other questions? Are you guys good?
We're good. Thanks, Allison.
Okay. You have a good afternoon. We'll talk soon.
You too. Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.